welcome. I request everybody to kind of be in the circle, join us. So we're beginning the last session of the seminar. It's called Conscious Applications of the Works of Sri Aurobindo and Mahatma Gandhi. It's interesting, today morning Arvinda read out the Mother, and what a tremendous focus that came on the Mother. Even in the movie, it was Mother, India being seen as the Mother. And then in the morning, Bande Mataram again at the feet of the Mother. And Arvinda mentioned that when we say Mother, it is really the creative power, the creative force that creates, that leads to the manifestation. It's the force behind the manifestation. And that makes manifestation very central to what we are talking and what we are focusing on in this seminar. Yesterday, Ganesh Deviji had also mentioned about that if there's one thing that he would like to escape from is passivity. It's very important to act, and that's one of the commonality between the works of Sri Aurobindo and Mahatma Gandhi, that both of them asked us to be in action, in work. Whereas the nature of the work may seemingly be very different in the followers of both Mahatma Gandhi and Sri Aurobindo, but the focus on work and work as sadhana is really at the heart of both Sri Aurobindo and Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, Mahatma Gandhi's name itself, Mohandas Karamchand, the one who shines in work, Gandhi. So that brings us to action, and today we are going to be exploring with actually 5 speakers. So this particular session, each speaker gets slightly lesser time than in the other sessions that we've had so far. So we have Anu Majumdar, who will be talking about Auroville, which is where we are sitting right now, and it's one of the central applications of the work of Sri Aurobindo, a manifestation of a city. Then we have Shivakumar, who would be talking to us about the work of Sri Aurobindo Society. And we have Ram from Sustainable Livelihood Institute, ex-director of SLI, who's an interesting mix between Sri Aurobindo and Gandhi, because he's been in Auroville for close to 2 decades and really inspired by Gandhi. So, and then we go for a small tea break, and then we also have sharings by Inamul and Ananta. So with that, I'd like to invite Anu. Anu is a writer, a poet, the very, very well-known Penguin publisher book, Auroville, The City of the Future. She's the author of that book. Prior to that book, she's written several books and several poems. I find she's one of the people in Auroville who sees what's the essence of Auroville and yet is able to synthesize what is currently the reality of Auroville, and is able to make that bridge very, very beautifully in a way that leads to the future. So with that, I'd like to welcome Anu.
Conscious application. I think most of you had this paper on the chair somewhere. Let's start a little bit with that. And what we apply in our lives in Auroville is actually the charter. And the very first line and the last, there are 4 points there. The very first point actually summarizes what this project is about. It belongs to humanity as a whole. So Auroville itself is the experiment which is being stewarded for humanity. It is Auroville the experiment. Those who participate in the experiment are the Aurovillians, and they have to be the willing servitors of the divine consciousness. So these 2 demands are somehow there in the very first part of our charter. And where this charter leads is, if you read it, it says, for material and spiritual researchers, for an actual human unity. So material and spiritual, these two things go together. So as a result, we were given at the onset a charter, which is this blueprint of the spiritual path, and we were given a city plan to materialize this experiment, let's say. And in between we have these two other elements to go from point 1 to point 4, that to achieve that you have to be in the space of unending learning. That's an unending experiment. And this experiment is not just for the sake of doing things, it's to be able to make that bridge between the past and the future. So that is the overview, let's say. Now, before going into what we are doing here, the topic we have of this seminar is extremely fascinating. We're calling it the Indian Renaissance. We're calling it, we have on the one hand we have Gandhiji, and on the one hand we have Sri Aurobindo, these two figures, great beings actually. And somewhere I felt before we come to the thing what we do, because we do many things which many other people also do. What defines it is why we are doing it. And given the forum we are at, I thought, let's review that first before we come to Auroville again. So we have Gandhiji, we have Sri Aurobindo, and they are two giant strands of vision. And there is a kind of resonance, even as Deviji said, Ganeshji said, that there were from time to time differences, there were from time to time even criticism of each other. Somewhere there was a resonance there was no question that they were both working for humanity and for India. So, and despite all those apparent differences of path, both were seeking to take humanity forward, and even though they never really met, that resonance between them has actually endured. And as it was said, we need them both in different ways. Here in Auroville, we, let's say, need this path which has been given to us, but this path, as I said, is for humanity. It is that whole spectrum, and it is that wide unity. So everything has to be embraced in the right way, together. So just let me go back, because yesterday there was a very interesting date which was given to us first by Manoj, this 1893, and to see the spectrum from Vivekananda to Gandhiji, to Sri Aurobindo, to Tagore. There was a fascinating constellation of beings which were put in place for this independence, and they were acting at different times in different ways. And there was, again, that resonance of the action which was coming through them. So I'll just take you back a little more, once more, and focus on another date. So as you know, Sri Aurobindo left for Pondicherry in 1910. And this was following a second warning that he would be arrested, and this time that he would be deported. So he chose to come to Pondicherry. He didn't choose, he had the Adesh to come to Pondicherry. And it seemed that he had vanished from public life, and even though a lot of people were writing to him, please come back, because suddenly the whole movement of Swaraj was left leaderless. But he really went behind the veil, so to speak. And then in 1914, the mother arrived in Pondicherry. And suddenly, in a few months' time, there's the publication of the Arya, and he comes back into focus. And in that first issue of Arya, there's the first chapters of Life Divine, of the Upanishads, synthesis of yoga, secret of the Veda. So he was putting down the major, search through which he was, wanting to take this evolution of humanity forward. So all that whole exploration was there. So it was no longer the revolutionary period he was in. He was taking this revolution towards its evolutionary phase with this. And as he would say, I am concerned with the earth. And that he was pursuing in yoga that considered life not an illusion, but a thing divine. A creation for progressive fulfillment of life through the truth consciousness. And this truth consciousness, of course, he defined as the supramental consciousness. So, please forgive me for doing all this, but I have to. All right. Now, how did he come to that? Because so far, till 1910, he was recognized as this revolutionary. Now remember that in 1908, he was arrested on charges of sedition, and he was imprisoned. And in that prison, he had this profound inner encounter with Vivekananda, and which plunged him through very rapid spiritual realizations and the course of his work, as though that was shown to him. So when he came, and at the same time, it's very interesting, at the same time he was editing the Bande Mataram. And it was his political writing, even today, stands out. It was powerful, it was satirical, it was scathing, it was, I mean, one of the, I would say, epitome of political writing at a certain point. And in that, as an editor, he was saying, we of the new school would not pitch our ideal 1 inch lower than absolute Swaraj. We are arguing the impossibility of a healthy national development under foreign rule. So that was sometime in 1907, and as we see, he was arrested in 1908. But this Swaraj, I think you all have mentioned that. This Swaraj was not just a political self-rule. It depended on the realization of that inner selfhood, that Swaraj could only manifest through the power of the self, the inner self, the recognition of that. So 3 years later, he was back, he was in Pondicherry. But there was another thing which happened in 1914. The mother came, Arya started. In December 1914, Gandhiji returned to India permanently. And he went to see Rabindranath Tagore. And somehow that the new leader of the movement was there, and that leadership and that momentum was once again alive. So, and it's interesting that around that time, one of his disciples, a young man, came to him and he wanted to join the revolutionary movement. We're talking about Puraniji. And he actually told him, no, there's no need for you to do that. It's better you concentrate on your yoga, because perhaps it is no longer necessary for the independence movement, that it no longer needs this revolutionary momentum. So what happened? Why did he come to such a conclusion? As we see, the momentum had been taken over by Gandhi by 1914. But the question of complete Swaraj was not yet solved. I think both Ganeshji and Manoj mentioned that at length, how that happened. And then there was the question of, this was the time, there was at one point something called the Amritsar massacre. And at that point, Gandhiji and Jawaharlal Nehru, they pitched for Swaraj. And this was both political and spiritual Swaraj. It's interesting that at that point, this recognition, this foundation was already so, deeply established. And then there was this question of the Indian dominion status that the British Raj was offering. That went through many altercations and finally didn't work out. And the whole, let's say, the committee which comprised of Nehruji and Gandhiji and all that, they felt very betrayed. And at that point, finally, the request for Purna Swaraj was pushed. And this comprised everything. It was the political freedom, the economic, cultural freedom, it comprised everything. And what was interesting to see is this term was actually coined by Hazrat Mohani, who is also responsible for what we hear today called Inqilab Jindabad. So there are all these very long threads that go back. Now, apart from freedom, Gandhiji was absolutely invested in seeing the upliftment and empowerment of the people, especially the poor and the farmers, together with freedom. Now, for Sri Aurobindo, this concern was a little different, and he would push it further because this action was already being carried by Gandhi. And he said that India would be free is certain. What she would do with it is what he was concerned with, because on her freedom depended the direction of the rest of the world as well. So it's not a surprise that when he finally comes out of Alipur jail, what he says is this. This was the famous Uttarpara speech. He says, India does not rise as other countries do for herself, or when she is strong, to trample on the weak. She is rising to shed the eternal light always entrusted to her over the world. India has always existed for humanity and not for herself, and it is for humanity and not for herself that she must be free. So this gives the freedom of India, the role of India, a very different dimension. And, well, we've lived through that. Now, the supramental consciousness, I'm just giving, because you came a little late, I'm just giving a little background to come to what Aurobindo's work is. Now, the supramental consciousness that he was working in was founded on this aim, that she does not work for herself, that she aims towards a much more synthetic and wider unity. And this is expressed very clearly in his the message he had to convey to the nation upon independence, which actually fell on his own birthday. So, and this message now is known as the Five Dreams, most of you know that. But it is interesting to see how he structured it and to see its relevance even today. So he says, the first of these dreams was a revolutionary movement which would create a free and united India. India today is free, but she has not achieved unity. The old communal division of Hindus and Muslims seems now to have hardened into a permanent political division in the country, and it is hoped that this settled fact will not be accepted as settled forever. For if it lasts, India may be seriously weakened, even crippled, India's internal development and prosperity may be impeded, her position among nations weakened, her destiny impaired or even frustrated. That means even the work of the evolutionary momentum that is something like Auroville represents would not be possible. This must not be. The partition must go. Let us hope that it may come about naturally by an increasing recognition of the necessity not only of peace and concord, but of common action, so that the unity may finally come about under whatever form, but by whatever means, in whatever way, the division must go. So it is being put across as something which has to be achieved in a humane, in a natural, peaceful, through social and cultural means. Now, what is interesting is that what he's saying here in 1947, he foresaw this problem already in one of his last articles in the Karma Yogin before he left. This is in 1909. About this difference, And he says, as a political question, the Hindu-Mohammedan problem does not interest us at all. As a national problem, it is of supreme importance. We shall make it a main part of our work to place Muhammad and Islam in a new light before our readers, to spread juster views of their history and civilization, to appreciate the Musliman's place in our national development, and the means of harmonizing his communal life with our own. So he laid so much stress on that because, as we will see, that the unity of India was almost, had to be the stable ground for the unity of everything else that he was looking at. So the unity and harmony of all the others that would follow. The second dream was the unity of Asia. The third was a world union. For unity, he said, was a movement of nature that, and only human stupidity would, get into the way and try to prevent it. And he said that a new spirit of internationalism would manifest as nationalism would fulfill itself and lose all its militancy, and allow the spirit of oneness to take hold of the human race. And for all this to happen, what was very important was India's spiritual contribution to the world, its spread, and not only in the world, but also within itself. Because only that, together with everything, would allow the evolutionary step to happen in mankind. The fifth dream, the final one, is actually about this evolutionary step. So here he says that a step in evolution, the final dream, he says, is a step in evolution which would raise man to a higher and larger consciousness and begin the solutions of the problems in the world which have perplexed and vexed him. Now, for this, obviously, the whole world is not yet there. It is still struggling to find unity at many levels. And yet, it is interesting that the mother in her final years would plant a seed of this evolutionary momentum with the creation of Auroville just a few years before she passed away. So that is that she's somehow assured that this would happen, whatever difficulties we go through. So unity is, as we said right in the beginning, that is the core purpose of Auroville. It was also the core purpose, or the dream also of Gandhiji when he started the freedom movement. And we know his incredible anguish during the partition and the riots and everything that followed. Now, just a year after independence, we lost Gandhiji. And this is the message, I wanted to read this out, that Sri Aurobindo gave. It's a very short message, and he said, I don't actually want to speak at this time. I would prefer to remain silent. But then he says, the power that brought us through so much struggle and suffering to freedom will achieve also, through whatever strife or trouble, the aim which so poignantly occupied the thoughts of the fallen leader at the time of his tragic ending. As it brought us freedom, it will bring us unity. So it seems that unity, and Auroville is part of this huge momentum, it is part of this Indian soil. And this is the action that is required of all of us here. So Auroville was born in laid the foundations, she set the foundation ceremony in February 1968. And as we saw in the charter also, unity is the culminating aim of Auroville. And as we know, unity is the domain of the human soul. That is its from where it ranges. And the soul is part of the universal consciousness, and the person part of the universal. In the realization of Auroville, she also said that Auroville would be the first realization of human unity according to the teaching of Sri Aurobindo, where people from all countries would be at home. And Sri Aurobindo himself dedicated an entire series of essays called The Ideal of Human Unity, where he explores this unity through different levels, through different moments of historical events. And he has these two last chapters before the postscripts chapter that you mentioned, which is called The Religion of Humanity. Now, he's very careful to point out what he means by religion of humanity, for the lack of a better word. It has nothing to do with organized religion, which he says failed and deserved to fail because of a number of historical evidence that we have. But he makes that subtle distinction between religion and the spiritual thread that India has carried all along. And that spiritual thread has always reinvented itself, has always evolved, has always grown. And he says that the soul has three attributes, and these are freedom, equality, and unity. For, as he said, when the soul claims freedom, it is the freedom of its self-development and the self-development of the divine in all his being. When it claims equality, what it is claiming is the freedom equally for all and the recognition of the same soul and the same Godhead in all human beings. And that the key transition of this unity was to get people, human beings, to live from the soul and not from the ego. You know, we've heard everything about the ego this morning and even before, so I don't need to go into detail about that. So that, I just brought that out as a sort of background from where Auroville actually sprang. So what do? We do all kinds of things. We started by just taking care of the land, building the Matri Mandir when there were only 200 people. But there are certain conditions to this. How do you act? Now, if you have that paper with you somewhere, there's something called to be a true Aurovillian. Now, the mother would actually meet with people in the early days. We were very few people, and one day she said, "You're only 30 people now, it's very difficult, isn't it? When there will be 30,000 of you, it'll be much easier because there will be much more possibilities, many more potentials." So she was starting a small town. Now, why would these people want to start a town? You know, they had an ashram, they could have built another big ashram, that would be sufficient. But what is very interesting is back in 1931, when she was working with Sri Aurobindo had kind of stepped back, and she was running the ashram. And somebody asked her, "So what is it that you all are doing? What is your work?" And she explained that the work we are doing now is to establish the connection between that supramental consciousness and material reality. And once that is achieved, it has to have an outward expression in the form of a model town. Because a town, you know, like in the traditional spiritual path that India has so richly explored, it has always been the upward path, the ascension, and the merging, unity with the divine. But the question he was raising is, this is fine, we have unity with the divine, but what about what's happening down there? That is not changing. And to a great extent, Gandhiji was addressing that with Sarvodaya, but he was also going further into the problem of human nature. Because until human nature changes, all those things, however nice, also have a tendency to not work out. So a city of a small scale would give the possibility of change to happen at many levels for many types of people, and allow this experiment to, take off, to see the results there. And if it would work, then it would automatically transpire to the rest of humanity, and starting in small ways, the way we already see what is happening with Auroville's work, with sustainability and green work, that is already traveling. But that is not enough, that's just a first step. For a city of this scale, much more had to be achieved. So the first condition to be this true Aurovillian is the necessity of the inner discovery, in which you know who you are behind social, moral, cultural, hereditary, or the whole list of things which create divisions. And at the center there is a free being, and it is from this point of vastness that you are asked to act and take your development and decisions. What does that mean? Is that Auroville is this multicultural, multi-language, multi-ethnic, multi-nationalities, multi-social strata. We had that whole mix already in 3,000 people. Already when we were 200 to 500 people, we felt that very intense diversity. It sounds very exotic when we say that, all this, but actually it's very difficult. At one level, it's miraculous that it works, that despite the difficulties, it keeps working and it keeps growing. But there are so many levels of human nature, the problems of human nature, that have to be sorted out. Not just on an individual level, they have to be sorted out in levels of cultural understandings or misunderstandings. So many layers are there. But that is exactly what she was creating over here. And the culminating point of this experiment actually was the international zone, Bharat Nivas, the international pavilions. And this is where she wanted that after whatever is happening within the community, that this would be a place where it would reach and interact with the world. So you would have all these very different clusters of cultural pavilions. She didn't call them national pavilions, by the way. This is also interesting. She called them cultural pavilions. That people were acting, that each cultural pavilion would first find its nation's soul. That you act, the point of action is from the soul. And one of the things which defines this international zone is that the unity of the human race can be achieved neither through uniformity nor through domination and subjection. A synthetic organization of all nations, each occupying its own place in accordance with its own genius, has a chance of enduring. From here, let's just go to the second one. The second one is from where we act. The action is not from your personal freedom. The action is from desirelessness. So to go beyond the ego. The reference to the collective, that by doing that you are not only acting for yourself, but you are acting to create this collective body. The third is to lose the sense of personal possession and to trust that we will be given what we need in this life. And obviously no attachment to possessions or to positions. So towards that, in Auroville, nobody has any claims to any personal property, whether it's institutional building or a farm or a unit or a school or somebody's house. Everything belongs to Auroville. Everything belongs to the experiment. So by that, we are taking ourselves away from that personal domain to the to that state where you can go beyond the ego. So, and towards that, we also have many experiments with the way we function financially. People contribute to the common pot, which then allows us to sustain everybody who needs it to be sustained and to maintain the city. No exchange of money is the final aim, but for that, it seems we need to be a minimum of 25 to 30,000 people, so we have to grow. And growth is important to be able to realize the experiment at all its levels. But as in Auroville, as we are growing, we have to grow to 50,000, we are only 3,000. So every 5 to 7 years, things have to change, systemically, collectively, personally. This need to adapt, the need to always stay flexible is an important part. And the other point which is highlighted is the importance that everybody has to work, because through work, this process of transformation, the process of the evolution, the personal evolution is allowed, not only for yourself, but how you work with each other. When we were building the Matri Mandir, there was nothing. We were living off nothing. We were working with whatever was available. Conditions were very hard, there was nothing to eat, but there was such a joy, as though the divine looked after us, I would say, giving us the wages of that incredible joy and that incredible faith that we had that everything would be fine. And I still remember a very little story that One day there was a group, we were working in the Matri Mandir, it was the month of June, it was very hot. And we were coming down around 1 o'clock, and I said it would be so nice if we had some pineapple to eat. So when we came to the kitchen, to the common kitchen, there was nothing but 3 slices, very thin slices of pineapple. So that much was granted, you know. So there was this, but there was like, okay, wow, you have pineapples, you know. So there was this joy, this immense gratitude at that point. So that was the way it was, we kept growing. And one of the things which is interesting to know about unity, if you've gone inside Matri Mandir, the inner skin has this color which is kind of salmon pink. And it is the color of what she called the Auroville flower. And she called the significance of that flower was the beauty of supramental love. Now we don't know what supramental is as yet, but that is that consciousness of unity. So it is that beauty of unity that is the ultimate expression of Auroville. So beauty plays a very strong role in everything that we are expected to do, to build, beauty of thought, beauty of expression between each other, beauty of what we are creating, everything, beauty of thought, yeah. So, I'll just come back, just close with the last point of the city, because the last 2 points of this, to be a true Aurovillian, is that our action is meant for the evolution of humanity, it's not for ourselves. We're just passing by, actually. And passing by and doing the best we can. And the last point goes back to the first point of the charter. It says, and for the time being, all you need is to completely surrender yourselves to this experiment. If you're joining this experiment, you have to kind of let go of that ego and work from there. So the city she gave us is actually an integrated plan. It's a planned city on top of that. It starts from the peace area, and it has all these different dimensions of the residential, the industrial, this international, the cultural, which includes education, and we have the environmental. If you look at the Auroville symbol outside, it actually represents that. And what each of these parts allows is that it allows, first of all, by the plan itself, a very interdependent existence, an overlapping and integrated dependence, growth, and it allows people to grow in different ways at different times. So that integral growth of the personality is allowed. Now somebody can come and do one kind of work throughout his life in Auroville, and say, we have people like that. Somebody who's sitting at the financial desk and has sat there for the last 40 years, and will probably not move, and that's fine. There are people who have worked in each of the zones at different times, because work was needed in each of these areas, and by that has grown in a different way. So these are some of the overview, possible examples of what we do and why we do. Over and out.